What if I told you that a group of bored, rich, well-connected housewives nagged their husbands into starting probably the biggest censorship campaign that vilified artists and music labels? But what if I told you those same labels, while they're being vilified, were secretly thrilled because of, well, you know, money? And what if I told you that none of this is about what they said it was about? So sit down, grab a cup of coffee, and let's talk about the insane birth of the Parental Advisory sticker and the story that you probably didn't know about. We're gonna have to go at light speed because there is a ton of information to cover. We're gonna talk about how this whole thing started, why it really should have never started, what was the catalyst behind this whole thing, and the infamous Filthy 15. And in a weird, ironic twist, certain songs that didn't make the list that probably should have, and a bunch of other stuff that they should have been talking about. We're also going to talk about some of the crazy album art that got censored, the weird way the government got involved, and the even weirder way that the music industry wanted the government to get involved. How this actually affected the industry, and then we're going to find out if anybody actually got what they wanted. Picture this. Tipper Gore cleaning up her daughter Karina Gore's room and finding Purple Rain by Prince. Pretty innocuous album, right? Well, apparently it triggered Tipper Gore to go insane with righteous indignation, because when she listened to the song Darling Nikki from Prince's Purple Rain, she was triggered, and she got together with a bunch of her buddies because they got bored at the book club, and they created the PMRC, the Parents Music Resource Center, founded in 1985. But they weren't just concerned moms. They were here to help America. And they just so happened, well, to be married to politicians and other really important people in Washington, D.C. And yeah, Al Gore got them a Senate hearing. Probably because he was sick of hearing about it. And when Tipper Gore got on the case, well, she found 15 tracks that parents across America needed to know about because it was corrupting their children. The Filthy 15. These were the songs that enraged 4 Karens in Washington, D.C. Prince, Darling Nikki. Sheena Easton, Sugar Walls. Judas Priest, Eat Me Alive. Vanity, Strap On Robbie Baby. Motley Crue, Bastard. AC/DC, Let Me Put My Love Into You. Twisted Sister, in a very weird We're Not Gonna Take It. Madonna, Dress You Up. W.A.S.P, Animal, doing Something Like a Beast. Yeah, this one's not a lot of ambiguity. Def Leppard, High and Dry. Merciful Fate, Into the Coven. It's got occult themes. Now, we're gonna go on a bit of a birdwalk because this is during the Satanic Panic. In 1980, a book called Michelle Remembers was published. Written by Lawrence Pazdur and his patient, it claimed recovered memories of a satanic ritual cult. And from that was born the Satanic Panic. Bit of an overlap here, especially with heavy metal music and board games like Dungeons and Dragons. So the PMRC kind of used that a little bit, springboarded off of the Satanic Panic momentum. If you want to see a whole video on that, which I really want to make, please put it in the comments. I really want to make that video. Speaking of the occult, Black Sabbath had trashed on the list because of drug and alcohol use, surprisingly. Mary Jane Girls, In My House. Venom, Possessed, occult themes. Cyndi Lauper, She Bop. What about the children? There's a bunch of other music too that was not included on the list, but maybe they didn't fit Tipper Gore's narrative. The Rolling Stones, Under My Thumb. Apparently, it's about misogynistic themes about controlling women. The Police, Every Breath You Take. It's about a stalker and emotional manipulation. George Thorogood, One Bourbon, One Scotch, One Beer. But the kids weren't really into George Thorogood, even though I had that record. Iron Maiden, Number of the Beast. I'm pretty sure Iron Maiden is probably sad they got left off the list. ZZ Top, Pearl Necklace. I had that record too. Everybody had that record. Also, in a bit of irony, there were books that were sitting on the shelves in school libraries all over America by people like Stephen King, where there was no ambiguity in about what was written down. Lyrics, interpretation. Stephen King, it's fine. It's fine. They were protecting children against certain types of content. Not only were the lyrics under fire, but the album art was too. Some of this maybe for good reason. Poison, Open Up and Say Ah. I actually got the censored version. It just had the bars over it, so you saw the Thundercat's eyes, not his tongue. Guns N' Roses, Appetite for Destruction. I'd actually forgotten about the OG album cover. It's about a robot and a woman. It was banned, replaced with Skull and Crossbones.
Back in that bag again. Whoa, whoa, yeah, yeah. Hey. Back in that, yeah. Tell them to watch it, and I ain't talking my pockets.
And on September 19th, 1985, the Senate Committee on Commerce held a hearing on explicit lyrics. And what was supposed to be about warning labels turned into a full-blown cultural meltdown. Frank Zappa testified. He pulled out a pocket constitution. He called the PMRC's proposal treating dandruff by decapitation. That's what you get when you bring in an artist to testify. They're artists. They know how to say things in a poetic fashion and make really cool analogies. Why did they do this on television? Dee Snider rolled in. I'll just put the footage here. So Al Gore is reading some of the lyrics and basically grilling Dee Snider, and Dee Snider's like, listen, that's the beauty of art. People can have their own interpretation. He says, it's not my fault Tipper Gore has a dirty mind. Al Gore didn't like that very much. And then came John Denver, of all people. I think the PMRC probably thought that he was going to side with them, because he's John Denver. But not surprisingly, he actually stood up for the artists. Because, he's an artist. And he basically said, hey, this thing cuts both ways. Because a ton of people thought Rocky Mountain High was actually about drug use. Censorship, even if it's well-intended, is censorship. Frank Zappa also had to say the PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years. So that hearing was held by the Senate Committee on Commerce, Science, and Transportation. And it kind of seems weird that they're having Senate hearings about this. Until you realize that there's some other stuff going on, some legislation that not a lot of people talk about. And you'll never guess who would benefit from that legislation. If you're here for the first time learning anything new or just having a good time, please consider subscribing. Maybe send this out to a friend that doesn't know about this crazy story. While the PMRC was trying to keep teenagers from learning about sex, listen, it's gonna happen. Haven't you ever seen Blue Lagoon? They weren't playing Twisted Sister on that island, and they figured it out. Anyway, quietly behind the background, Congressman Bruce Morrison was pushing a bill that would let the music industry cash in on every blank tape anybody bought. On June 27th, 1985, and remember these dates because they are important, Bruce Morrison introduced H.R. 2911, a bill to slap a tax on blank cassette tapes. Why? Well, because people were making mixtapes. People were recording things off of the radio. People were also recording CDs. And because of all these gosh darn mixtapes, which I made an entire video about, I'll link it at the end of this video, the music industry, well, they wanted a tax every time somebody recorded Every Rose Has Its Thorn on a mixtape. And this bill just so happened to be living in legislative purgatory. I had to say that like 5 times. I can't say legislative. Now I can. Until the PMRC showed up. And now we have the PMRC over here and the music industry over here. And there's a bit of an alignment. Because suddenly the RIAA saw an opportunity. Behind the scenes, they could team up with the censorship, soccer-rich Washington, D.C. moms, which They just happen to be married to politicians and very influential Washington, D.C. businessmen. Because if they can make the moms happy, maybe they can get their bill passed and get that sweet, sweet blank tape money from the tax. So, what did the RIAA do? Well, before the Senate hearing even happened, they went ahead and said, yeah, we're going to put labels on stuff. Absolutely, 100%. There was no fight, no delay, no Senate hearing needed. They were already going to do it. And Frank Zappa also had something to say about this. In regards to the tape tax, they sold out the First Amendment to push through a bill that would tax home taping. That's the real obscenity. He has a way with words. Because he's an artist. But this story gets a little bit more interesting because who would collect that tax and how would it be distributed? So under HR 2911, the plan would be simple. Every blank tape or recording device would have a tax levied on it. That tax would be funneled into a giant pot managed by the what? Register of Copyrights. And then it would be divided up magically and paid to, yeah, well, that's the problem. The government nor anyone else would know what was actually being recorded. It could be poetry, could be Michael Jackson's Thriller, could be birds on your back porch. How is anyone going to know what is recorded on the tape? Or which artist or music label was infringed upon? Well, the big labels didn't care. So if you were a small label, you're screwed. You're not getting any of that sweet, sweet blank tape tax money. And Frank Zappa, once again, had something to say about it. It's a private tax levied by an industry for the industry. So think about this. In the headlines, in the public, it was all about the children. The music industry had said, well, hey, let's protect those children as long as we get our blank tape tax bill passed. But it gets even weirder. So why even bother with a hearing? Well, because it gave the PMRC a public platform with news articles, talk show appearances, news coverage. Then the Senate hearing gave, well, the senators a way to protect your children and let everyone know that they're protecting your children and they are of the utmost moral fiber. And it gave the RIAA a cover story because what they really wanted passed was that blank tape tax. And the most absurd part of this whole deal is who decided what got the sticker? Was it a government board like the MPAA for movies? No. It was left up to the labels themselves. And oddly enough, Walmart and Kmart. Sometimes the artists would just put one on there anyway because they didn't really care. We'll get into that more later. So there's no universal process, no guidelines to even go by, no checklists. And at the end of the day, even if there was, they would be interpreting lyrics. It's not like a movie when someone's head gets ripped off, or in The Thing when they go to use the defibrillator and they just crash through the chest cavity, or there's gratuitous nudity. That's fairly straightforward. But they had none of that in place for the music industry. And since the labels were policing themselves, they didn't really care because it actually benefited them and artists. After all of the outrage, the moral superiority, the hearings, the stickers, what actually happened? Well, a whole bunch of confusion. I remember on my birthday getting very excited when I opened up a cassette and it was NWA straight out of Compton. But when I played it, it was the clean one. Uncle Alan had purchased the wrong one for me. However, I went out and purchased the right one. So, I owned 2 copies of NWA. The good one and the clean one. They got to sell 2 cassettes to me. And in another ironic twist, the Parental Advisory explicit content sticker became a bit of a badge of honor. The point is that artists were now using this as a way to immediately change the public's perception about them. Remember when Miley Cyrus went all wackadoo on stage and instantly transitioned from someone on the Disney Channel to an edgy artist. Well, this was exactly the same thing, except nobody had to go on TV to do it. And Prince, the reason why this whole thing got kicked off to begin with, he really leaned into it. Sign of the Times in 1987, he fully embraced it. In the end, the PMRC, well, they got their sticker, which they would have gotten anyway. Music companies got to sell more copies. The truth is, none of this was what they said it was about. The sticker was going to happen anyway, but it had no continuity, no consistency, no system, so it had really no weight. It was just a way for the music execs to say, hey, listen, we're doing what you said you want. Now, help us out. So what happened with the tape tax? Did it get passed? No. So in the end, the Senate hearings weren't really about protecting kids from sex and occultism. It was just about taking the moral high ground with all of the righteous indignation. Because there's nothing that galvanizes a group of bored, wealthy housewives of politicians than to tell artists who they find morally repugnant that they're doing the wrong thing and that the public should be appalled at their art. It gives them something to do, a purpose, to impose their will on the poor people. And the real irony is that little black and white sticker, it just helped kids. Kids didn't have to even know the artist or be familiar with their music to be able to pick out the right one that gave their parents the metaphorical middle finger. So thank you, PMRC. You made it easier for the kids to find the music that they wanted.
Back in that bag again. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Hey. Back in that, yeah. Tell them to watch it. Now I ain't talking my